Some people take a hit of DMT, stare into a red laser on the wall, and swear they can read alien code. Not just random squiggles, neat rows of symbols like a cosmic programming language printed across a beam of light. Sounds like Reddit mythology, right? Except there is now a real pilot paper in a real journal describing this exact thing, a named author, a documented laser setup, and over 1,000 people following the same protocol. So tonight on Lightseed Radio, we're going to stand in the middle of that tension. On one side, the serious lab work, EEG, fMRI, big surveys. On the other, the fringe, entities, laser beams, and matrix-style code that some people swear proves we live in a simulation. My name's Andrew, this is Lightseed Radio, and this episode is called DMT and the Hidden Alien Code, Do We Live in the Matrix? Right. Before we talk to entities and read code in lasers, we need 1 minute of reality check. What is DMT really? Chemically, DMT is a tryptamine psychedelic, very close to serotonin, the brain's own signaling molecule. Your receptors already know this general shape, and it appears all over nature, in plants, animals, and in tiny amounts in mammals, including us. In humans, when it's given as an intravenous injection in a hospital or vaporized and inhaled in a clinical setting, it reliably creates an experience that is unbelievably intense but incredibly short. We're talking peaks in under 2 minutes and mostly done within about 15 to 30 minutes. In the early 1990s, Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico ran the first modern government-approved DMT studies. Controlled IV doses, continuous monitoring of heart rate, blood pressure, hormones, and very detailed interviews about what people experienced. Those papers are the backbone of the modern spirit molecule story. Fast forward a few decades, and the action moves to places like Imperial College London. Instead of just asking, what did you see? Researchers started filming the brain on DMT with EEG and fMRI at the same time. In 2019, Christopher Timmerman and colleagues gave volunteers IV DMT and recorded multi-channel EEG. They found alpha and beta waves, the normal rhythms of waking consciousness, drop off a cliff. Signal diversity, a measure of how complex and rich brain activity is, jumps up. They described the state as like a vivid waking dream. Then in 2023, the same group combined EEG with fMRI, which showed electrical activity on the scalp, blood oxygen changes deep in the brain. As people were blasted into DMT space, they saw normal resting state networks, including the default mode network, lose their tight, rigid structure. Global connectivity between regions increase. So look, in simple language, DMT turns your brain into a hyper-connected dream engine while you're still technically awake. And that's the launch pad for everything that comes next. Because when people describe what it feels like, they don't say, my alpha power decreased and my signal diversity went up. No. They say things like, I met beings. They showed me how reality works. They told me not to be afraid of death. In 2020, Alan Davis and team published a survey of over 2,500 people who had inhaled DMT and reported encountering an entity. They didn't just collect trip reports, they coded them. Patterns emerged. The entities were often described as conscious and intelligent. Communication felt telepathic, more like receiving data than hearing a voice. And a large number of people said the encounter left lasting changes. Less fear of death, a sense that reality is more real than it appears day to day, or a conviction that they'd contacted something beyond their own mind. You can absolutely read this in a neuroscience-only way. A brain, a high-entropy DMT state, takes its own patterns and expectations and turns them into characters in a world. But you can also read it as, under these conditions, something on the other side can finally get your attention. The data doesn't pick a winner. It just tells us that entity contact on DMT is common, structured, and often life-changing. That's important because when we talk about alien code in lasers, we're really talking about a specific version of this same entity and information thing. Okay, quick detour to the more sober side of the story. While psychonauts are meeting clockwork elves and arguing about simulations, clinicians and pharmaceutical teams are asking a different question. Can this do anything useful for people who are suffering? Because most classic psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, ayahuasca, can keep you in orbit for 6 to 8 hours. DMT hits like a rocket and comes back down in 10 to 30 minutes. That's why researchers like Marcelo Fauci Carvalho, and yes, I did have to practice how to say that name, have run phase 1 and phase 2 trials on vaporized or inhaled DMT candidates. Phase 1, safety and tolerability in healthy volunteers, no serious adverse effects, predictable intensity, effects peaking fast and clearing quickly. Phase 2A, people with treatment-resistant depression seeing rapid reductions in symptoms after a single supported DMT session, with some maintaining benefits for weeks. These are early small studies. We're not at DMT clinics on every corner yet. But while we're about to talk lasers and alien alphabets, it's worth knowing that in parallel, there's a very serious conversation happening about DMT as a short-acting tool in psychiatry. Okay, side quest acknowledged, back to the weird. We've got a molecule, a brain that turns into a waking dream engine, and a documented pattern of people meeting entities that feel like independent intelligences. Now we add a laser. A psychonaut named Danny Gola started talking about a very specific setup. A collimated 650 nanometer red laser, diffracted so it creates a flat speckle pattern on a matte wall, viewed while on DMT. Under normal conditions, it's just blurry red dots. But under DMT, according to him and many followers, those dots snap into structures. Clean geometric lines and then rows of characters that look like some hybrid of alien glyphs and Japanese katakana. In 2024, he published a pilot paper in IPI Letters, detailing a pilot study, a code of reality protocol, a phenomenon of DMT-induced states of consciousness. It's not a clinical megatrial. It's more like this. Here's the thing we keep seeing, here's a setup, and here's why we think it happens. But it does 3 important things. It locks in the laser setup as a concrete protocol. It reports repeating experiences of code-like symbols across many users, and it explicitly says this is not a DIY how-to. DMT legality and laser safety are serious. The story then jumped to the mainstream in a Vice article titled "The Man Who Can Prove Life is a Simulation with Just a DMT Vape and a Laser." Suddenly you had Telegram groups, long-form podcasts, and living rooms full of people all staring at the same red line on the wall, arguing about whether they could see the code of reality. So is that it? Did we just hack the source code of the universe with a vape and a laser pointer? Let's not be so quick, as there are other opinions. Neuroscientists like Andrew Gallimore have pointed out a much more grounded possibility. A red laser on a wall produces a speckle pattern, tiny bright and dark spots that shift with movement and focus. A brain on DMT is hyperconnected, hypersensitive, and absolutely desperate to find structure and meaning. Put them together and you have the perfect recipe for the brain to lock onto random noise and stabilize it into what looks like glyphs or text. Some scientists and commentators who tried the protocol reported seeing only normal speckle, even at strong doses, nothing like a readable alphabet. So the honest position tonight is, There is a published pilot report in a small physics journal describing a reproducible laser code phenomenon under DMT. It has enough detail that other labs could try to replicate it, but it's early, controversial, and many neurobiologists suspect it might be a very sophisticated brain optics illusion. And here's the twist. Even if it is an illusion, it's telling us something fascinating about what a DMT-shifted brain can do with a very simple light. All right, quick reality check before we float off completely. In most countries, DMT is a controlled substance outside of approved research settings or a few specific religious exemptions. It's illegal to possess or use. The work we've talked about tonight, Strassman's hospital studies, Imperial's EEG and fMRI experiments, Fauci Carvalho's inhaled DMT trials, Goda's Code of Reality pilot. They all sit on a spectrum from carefully controlled research to fringe, but at least documented experimentation. The Code of Reality paper itself goes out of its way to say, we are documenting what people report. This is not an invitation to replicate the protocol. The aim of this episode isn't to tell you how to do anything. It's to lay out what researchers are finding in labs, what people are reporting in these extreme states, and where that line between experiment and mythology gets very, very blurry. Because that blurry line is where questions about consciousness and reality start to get interesting. So where does all of this leave us? On one hand, we have decades of serious work showing DMT as a short-acting psychedelic that radically reshapes brain activity, and early evidence it might help some people with severe depression. A large survey showing that entity encounters on DMT are not just isolated anecdotes, but a common, structured part of the experience with lasting psychological impact. And now on yet another hand, many hands, we have a fringe but published protocol where people on DMT staring into a red laser speckle pattern report seeing alien code, now immortalized as the Code of Reality. Is that proof we're living in a simulation? No. Is it proof that a DMT-saturated brain can impose astonishing levels of structure on simple light? Absolutely. You could argue DMT lets you watch the source code of your own perception, rendering the world from noise. Or you could argue under certain conditions it opens a window onto a larger layered reality where information, entities, and maybe even something like code are waiting for us to show up. Right now, the peer-reviewed literature doesn't give us a verdict. It gives us graphs, brain scans, questionnaires, clinical outcomes, and carefully written descriptions of experiences that sound like they belong in science fiction. The rest, what's just brain, what's more than brain, is still an open question. So next time someone says, I saw alien code in a laser beam on DMT, you can say, okay, here's what the data says, here's what the neuroscientists think, here's what the fringe experimenters are reporting, and here's what's still completely unknown. So now, if you want more episodes where we do exactly that, take the weirdest claims and pin them against the best research we can find, hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and check the description for this video because I'm putting a link to every paper that I've spoken about, so you can further research it if you want. Next time on Lightseed Radio, we're stepping away from lasers and lab graphs and into something much more personal. I'll be talking with a friend of mine, a retired US Army captain who was shot in an attempted murder and medically died numerous times. We're not going to dwell on the actual true crime details. We're going to talk about what he remembers from the near-death experience itself, what he saw, what he felt, who or what he thinks he met there, and how, if at all, it changed the way he's lived his life since. And later on in a future episode, we'll circle back to him to talk about something else from his home state of New Mexico, Roswell. Until then, this is Lightseed Radio, decoding the known and the unknown, high-tech and high strangeness in a universe that might be even stranger than the code we think we're reading.